Okay, guys. So, as you both know, my name is Greg Conrad, and I'm with Conrad Services. We're a transaction coordination organization that has contracted with Coldwell Banker Premier to provide transaction coordination and other related contract services to the agents of Coldwell Banker Premier. I have been involved with the company um, officially since 2021, but prior to that as well, just in an unofficial capacity. Um, my bread and butter is transaction coordination, which Brian, you're aware of what that is, obviously. But for the sake of posterity, for the folks that aren't, who are viewing this recording later, a transaction coordinator is an individual that assists with ratified contracts. Some people call them TCs, some people call it a contract to close or a contract coordinator. But my specialty is taking a contract from ratification and assisting you, the agent, in that contract process through up to and even after settlement if there's a rent back or something along those lines involved. I have been doing this since 2019, and in between 2019 and today, I have run, hold on a second, I want to say it's like 400 and something close to 420 contracts in that period of time that are processed. So just to give you an example, I think if you had an agent that was working for 20 years that averaged 3 contracts a year, I would be a little over halfway there, roughly speaking, as far as what I've dealt with. The way I approach this, and there's really 3 different types of transaction coordinators that you would need to be aware of, and you probably come across yourself, Brian. There's the independent folks that are like me, who either have an agreement with agents directly or the brokerages. There is also the team-based TC, which you may see as like assistant to agent's name on their email signature or something like that. That's a direct hire situation when the team is growing and they want to hire someone to handle transactions, but also additional other things like marketing, database work, etc. And then there are brokerage-based transaction coordinators, which are actually employees of brokerages that provide the service in addition to other tasks through the brokerages themselves. So it's kind of 3 different baskets of how that works. I'm the independent version of that. I work directly with brokerages so that I can offer my services at pre-negotiated rates to the agents within the companies. So that way you don't have to worry about price. You know that the commodity that you're getting through my work has been vetted by the brokerage itself. So it's a little extra peace of mind from that aspect. There are 2 different types of transaction-based services that I offer, and then 2 additional services relating to offers and pre-ratification. The 2 services that I offer are what I'll call a full service or a transaction coordination service, and then a basic. The full service is what a traditional transaction coordinator would do, and that starts with reviewing the ratified contract once it's been received. The review is going to be for things like errors and omissions, compliance items, making sure that, you know, if it's a $200,000 house, but the EMD is like 90,000, oddities like that, I'm going to flag and then go over with the agent prior to proceeding to step 2, which is disbursement of the contract itself to clients, title attorneys, you know, co-op agents, whomever it needs to go to, depending on what side you're on. So it starts with a review process, and then it ends with settlement or post-settlement in the event that you have, like I said, a rent back or an escrow situation that you need to follow up on. That becomes my purview. In other words, the following up, the scheduling of follow-ups, the prompting of that, the coordination between the clients and the co-op agent, if that's still relevant at that time. For instance, if you got a rent back, I'm going to follow up on the walkthrough once that period of time is over, because that's a required document for the brokerage. So I'm going to make sure that I'm following up on that, even though I've already been paid, the agent's potentially already been paid. That's still part of my job to finish that out. So that process encompasses things such as communication directly with the client, as far as, you know, I'm going to send them the ratified contract. I'm going to help them prep for settlement, for scheduling that, and coordinate directly with the title attorney or title company to get them either scheduled or that ball rolling. I'm also, obviously, you know, if you've got a home inspection or a radon, scheduling that, following up with that, that all falls under my purview. Pre-settlement as well, we're going to do some reviews of, obviously, the preliminary CD or the preliminary settlement statement. The big thing is compliance as well, because throughout all this process, let's say you've got a home inspection and you wrap that up, in addition to, you know, composing that document for you with depending upon how the agent likes to do it, I can do everything from compose the addendum, send it out for signature, and forward it over to the opposing agent. So ultimately, if you chose, after ratification, unless there was something that you needed to sign, I could do 100% of the brokerage required paperwork to that end. And that's things like.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, absolutely.
What system do you use? Because we use, you know, Google Meet and Google Calendar, as well as a product called Engage, which is our database.
Sure. So I have used probably a half a dozen different types of management systems. I've tested out at least 4 different systems for my own company's use for managing transactions. What I use now is actually sort of lo-fi. I use Google Workspace, and I have documents and spreadsheets that I've created through that I use to manage the process, all of which is shared with you, the agent, through a Google site that I create and send to you. So that way you can always see at all times what documents I'm working on. You can take a look at my contract processing sheet to see where we're at in the process via my notes. And all of that is shared with the agents. I do archive those because I only have so much storage space. Usually every 6 months. I'm a little behind right now. Actually, I keep getting alerts that I need to do that. So that'll probably be in the next week or two. But all the documents that I keep, this includes everything that's uploaded into, you know, whatever the system is, be it zip forms, .loop, transaction desk, that sort of thing. All of those documents I keep copies of within my system until I archive them. And when I say archive, I mean I'm just pulling them off onto a couple of external hard drives for redundancy. So there's a long form answer, but to answer your question directly, I use my own internal systems, which I then share with the agents. But when it comes to sending signature packages or the creation of actual document forms, I would actually be working underneath of the agent's name within zip forms or Engage or transaction desk, what have you. So does that make sense?
Yep.
Perfect. But that actually brings up a good point, because one of the primary things that a transaction coordinator does that's helpful to agents is all of that minutia as far as the document creation, the sending the emails, the following up on everything. I don't actually, so I've got an internal calendar and a system that I use to track things. I don't actually send calendar invites to agents. So in other words, everything I do is metered out via email. And the reason I do that is because I've done that before, and what ends up happening is people get their calendars overloaded with all of my follow-ups and the contingency deadlines. So I'm not opposed to doing that again if it's something that really, really suits your style, but it's not something I do as a standard because it ends up becoming more of a hassle. Less is always going to be more with this kind of work. So the less that I'm bothering the agent, i.e. you, with, the more time you're going to have to proceed to, you know, obtain more sales or what have you.
Right. Okay.
But the transaction coordination service, that full service, encompasses pretty much all of that soup to nuts. So anything that's document related, anything that's scheduling related, and this is all based on agent preference. So I can do up to all of those things. Again, I'll be working as your assistant. So when I send emails, it'll have my signature on it, but it will, you know, any signature packages or envelopes that I send will always, the message will always say Greg, assistant to Brian Matthews, or insert agent name.
Okay, that's good.
That way your clients, even if they see something come from me, it's going to be under your signature profile, be that DocuSign or AuthentiSign or what have you. But it's always going to say assistant to you. So that way there's never a question of, well, who is Greg in this process? It's always, you know, I'm assisting you in your work, if that makes sense. And I do that as well via introduction emails to co-op agents, clients, title attorneys, etc. Making it very, very clear that I'm assisting you, the agent. Does all that make sense? Do you have any questions about that?
No, I think right now where we're at, I even made comments to Terry this morning. Unfortunately, we're going through a very unique, difficult time right now in the market. And so for me, this would be ideal to get 2 or 3, 4 deals under my belt with you, so that when we hit the next wave, which is going to happen when I don't know, but I think it's going to happen. That we have our process down. So it's although I feel like the Maytag repairman, there's a lot of things that we can work on in the background, some processes. So when it does hit, we're prepared.
Yeah,
Individually
it's funny.
prepared, and that kind of a take on it.
Yeah, it's almost like you're reading my script over here, Brian, because that's one of the things that I was going to address at the end, in addition to the other questions that you've asked. Now is ironically enough, it seems counterintuitive because every agent, I mean, even myself right now, is trying to shed costs as much as possible. Because with volume decreasing, you've got your personal budget or your corporate budget you have to make as an agent or a team. You're going to find whatever you can to cut that extra cost out to just survive. But counterintuitively, now is the best time to bring on this kind of service because things are slow, and it gives you that opportunity to say, okay, we've done a deal. Hey, Greg, here's what I liked. Here's what I didn't like. Let's tweak the process to that. So that way, by the third deal, it becomes automatic.
Right.
And that's it's something that it's hard to sell, but ironically, that is the best way to approach it. Is the slower times is the best time to get involved in something like this, because you have the time to put towards thinking about how it works, what you like and what you don't, and then that's going to pay dividends down the line. Convincing folks of that is not always easy, but that's the truth of it. All right, so that's the full service. We kind of talked about that. The basic service is a much more pared down version of that. It's cheaper, obviously, but that is geared solely towards documentation. So if you can imagine a brokerage admin that is yours and yours alone, whose sole goal is just focusing on document composition, sending to your clients for signatures, and ensuring that the brokerage compliance folks have everything that they need at the time. Like I said, it's a cheaper service. I'm not going to be scheduling anything with that service. I'm not going to be communicating with the title company for that service. All of the communication for that basic one is going to be between myself, you as the agent, and your client. That's it. And then obviously the brokerage. And that's geared towards the folks who have, kind of like you mentioned earlier, that have a process that they really enjoy and that they recognize their strength is customer facing, and they like the process of the paperwork and the coordination. But they might be not so great with the actual paperwork itself, or they might be in a situation where they have several deals closed, but they get held up on their checks because there's compliance issues in place. Missed initial, or a walkthrough that didn't get in, or something like that, and then spending time on that after the fact. That basic service is geared towards those kind of folks. It's cheaper, and again, something I'll touch on later. All of my billings for these transaction service are direct billed at settlement. So in other words, you are never going to have to cut me a check directly for the service unless there's an issue at settlement. But I submit a copy of my invoice and an authorization letter that the brokerage has created authorizing me to accept payment at settlement. So at the end of the year, I still track everything. So if your CPA needs to know, how much you paid towards the service, I can provide that for you. But it makes things a lot easier from a billing standpoint, as far as, oh crap, I just got paid, now I've got to pay Greg. Well, you don't, because it happened at settlement.
Sorry.
It's okay. Go ahead.
I currently have my own lender. I'm very happy with them. And fortunately, Coldwell Banker does not force us to use their in-house. I'm not opposed to throwing Chrissy a deal or two just to have a good solid backup. But do you also work well with my lender? If my lender, something comes up that needs to, like a FHA addendum, or something comes up that is needed from the lender for the file, do you also work with another person?
Yeah, so the full service, absolutely. That's going to be part of that full service. If your lender reaches out to you and I and says, hey, I've got an escape clause, I need you to get signed as soon as possible. And I'm not going to do anything carte blanche without having that conversation ahead of time. But for something like that pops up, usually that would be a text message from me to you saying, hey, are you okay if I send this? And you just give me a quick thumbs up. I turn it around, get it signed, from the co-op agent and then back to the lender. Yeah, that's absolutely something I would take care of. Other things that pop up that are similar to that, some of the larger title companies have gotten into using their own systems and sending links for sellers or buyers to fill out for their personal information that we're not privy to, i.e. payoff information, socials, stuff like that. I never touch any of that, but I will forward it and I will follow up on it to ensure that by a certain time prior to settlement, it's been completed. Because if it hasn't, obviously, not getting a payoff until a day before closing can absolutely impact when closing happens. So those sort of auxiliary items with different contract stakeholders, yes, I do follow up on those. They're just not part of the standard process because it's not always relevant,
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yep. Okay. So although I am acting as though I have your script in front of me, when do you get to the? I like these saying from the Missouri state, show me state. What's the bang for the buck for the big one, for the full package?
So
am I
I'll get to
that?
Yeah, well, so that is on my list, and you jumped ahead a little bit. I've got two more things I want to tell you about, and then we'll go over the pricing and how all that works.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, it's no problem. You're on point. In addition to the two transaction-based services, I offer two additional services that are pre-ratification. One is called an offer composition service, and the other is called an offer review service. They're exactly what they sound like. An offer composition is the scenario I like to use is, let's say that you showed a property to a client on a Wednesday. It's Friday night, you're out to dinner with your family, client calls you up, I want to put that offer in and I want to do it right now. I don't have much of a social life, so I'm always available after hours. So that kind of situation would be, you could call or text me and say, hey, Greg, here are the details. I would take those details, draft the offer, email it to you and or the client, depending upon preference, for you to review. And then once everything looks good, I would then send that for signatures and forward it to the listing agent for submission, all potentially while you're still at dinner with your family. That is a per use service. So in other words, it's on request. And that, along with the offer review, are billed differently than the transaction services. Those two, offer composition and review, are billed agent direct on a monthly billing cycle. So think of it in two kind of boxes. The first box is your transaction services, and those are billed at settlement, so you don't have to touch anything as far as funds. Anything you request directly, like an offer composition or an offer review, those I would bill on a monthly billing cycle. I'm old-fashioned. I prefer checks in the mail, but I also do have a online payment system that I use. It's called Stripe. It's pretty common that I can send electronic invoices on a monthly basis too as well. The offer review service, very similar to offer composition. If you were on the other side, if you were on the listing side and you received more than one offer, or if you just wanted a summarization of the offer when it's sent to your sellers, that's something that I do as well. I can do offer reviews on buyer side offers. So in other words, if you've got an offer that you prepped on a Tuesday and the client hadn't decided and you're out again on a Wednesday, you can't get to your computer, I can run into the system, review that offer to make sure that it's good from a compliance standpoint and that nothing crazy is happening with that. That would constitute, a use of the offer review service. But primarily offer reviews are going to be when you have a seller. Offer composition obviously is going to be when you have a buyer. Does that, like, kind of the gist of that make sense to you?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, and then anything else outside of those four individual services? I do have an hourly rate. It's $50 an hour. The reason it's that high is because the work that I complete isn't always take an hour, basically. So if there's something on the side, for instance, what I'm getting a lot of recently is listing amendments. Now, I don't touch listings as far as I'm not a listing coordinator. I'm not gonna, hop into your MLS and create the listing there for you and do all that runaround. But if you're in a pinch for time, I can put together a listing amendment. I can review a listing agreement and, come up with a list of questions or items that I see on it that might be relevant to look at prior to getting it signed. So I can do little things like that with the listing side, but I'm not in a position. There are certain types of people that make great listing coordinators, and I'm not that person. I love the ratification, the contract to close side of things. There are some people that really love the listing side of things and get really involved in those details and, you know, what type of tile it is in the kitchen. It's just not, I'm not fancy like that. So, but there is that hourly rate is there for anything that pops up that's outside of the 4 services. All right. You ready?
Yep.
Here we go. The prices for the services. The full transaction coordination service is $350 per transaction, and again, that's billed at settlement. What happens is when I send the contract to the title attorney or the title company for processing, I'll include my invoice there with a little blurb of instructions, just basically stating, you know, this invoice is to be paid at settlement. Now, in conjunction with that, you as the agent really have 2 options for how to pay that. Most of the agents I work with prefer to have that come out of their commission. There are some agents that will sometimes charge that direct to their clients. I don't have a problem with that as long as the client has understood and accepted that fee itself. The only caveat with that is if you are going to pass that fee along to your seller or buyer, they need to have agreed to it in writing. So in other words, it needs to be a blurb on the listing agreement, a little line that basically says, you know, buyer to pay transaction coordination service to Conrad Services, not to exceed $350 at settlement. Or if you're on a buyer side, same thing. On the other terms section, it needs to be denoted in the buyer is accepting that fee.
Well, let me ask you this, Greg, because we already have agents, because we've got an admin fee, right? Most transaction fee, whatever most companies
Right.
do. So I'm not going to use our exact numbers on this because this might be used in future, but say you pay $300 transaction fee to your company, it's very common for our agents to charge more than that, right? So we
Right.
might be paying the company $299 or $300 and then charge your client $500 as a transaction fee in your listing or your purchase or your buyer agreements. So why would that be any different? Like, couldn't they, if they're paying it at closing and they're already charging $200 over, then really they would just be responsible for an additional $150 at close.
Right. So
Would they need additional verbiage for that?
if there's going to be any dollar amount of my invoice that's going to be paid by the client, that has to be accepted in writing. And the reason for that is because my agreement is with the brokerage, and the brokerage owns the transactions. So if the agent is going to cover a portion, the client's going to cover a portion, the client needs to agree to that in writing because the brokerage already has. And then the agent then takes on that responsibility by accepting the use of the service. The client, if I charge the client that extra 150 and it comes out and let's say we get all the way to settlement and that ends up, you know, a portion of my payment comes from the client. If they didn't agree to that in writing and we don't have that, then I would not want there to be any issues after the fact, if that makes sense.
Perfect. So if they have that 200 built into what they already,
Mhm.
and then the agent themselves is paying that additional 150, no additional verbiage is needed because
No additional verbiage
it's
is needed.
covered
Yep,
under them. Understood.
exactly.
Want to clarify that. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Go ahead.
On that same thought, Charity, I've always been very fortunate. My original business practice was in California, and my EMDs are usually on the extremely high side compared to what Virginia Beach was getting. I don't do $500 EMDs. I do 5,000, 10,000. I do the EMD that makes sense for the transaction. Now that's neither here nor there. But my question is, we also have a marketing agreement form that I charge up front. I tell them, and they agree to by signing it on a separate document that they're going to pay me my $895 transaction fee. So again, on what Charity said, if I have that signed, which is broker required when I do the broker agreement, is that sufficient, or is there going to be an additional paperwork that my client needs to sign separate? Because the $895 is obviously covers my 2.25 that's due from the grandfathers James and Lee before we merged with Caldwell, and the overage is the offset for the 8% royalty fee. And
From what I understand from what Greg just said, that would fall into, if you are already collecting this, they have already signed, they are paying you that $895. You have them agree to that, and that $895 covers this transaction and more. So you're just using the money that the client's already agreed to pay you within that listing contract. Then you would
Okay.
not have to have anything additional in writing.
Correct.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for
Yeah,
clarifying that.
Yeah, no problem. So, what do you? Let me give you an example from my end. What I usually will see is, let's say there's a brokerage admin fee of $300, right? So that's going to be an additional fee in addition to the commission that the brokerage is going to get. So you've got those two line items there. If I am being paid by the agent directly on the settlement statement, what that will look like is this descriptive element only. And it'll say Conrad Services Transaction Coordination POC by listing brokerage or selling brokerage.
Sure.
Okay.
I'll get a check cut on the back end, but the way that you'll see that is when your commission check comes in. Let's say it's going to be $5,000. It'll end up being that 5,000 minus the 350.
Sure.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So if you got additional funds on top of that you're charging to your clients, and then it's kind of a wash from my perspective. The big thing for me is if you're going to pass any of that cost on to your clients, they have to agree to it in writing. So in other words, if they didn't agree to it in writing, and let's say you only charged a $200 admin fee for yourself, then your commission check when you get it would be $150 less. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
From time to time, I'll have a situation where a client's going to pay for some services that won't be part of the contract. If I coordinated a painter, and they're going to pay $800 for the painting contractor to fix his house up, and I usually submit that to escrow to be paid through escrow for ABC painting. Is that something that's allowable with you?
I'm not sure I understand. Are you questioning, can you add my additional payments after that, or is that something that I would track for you?
outside my $895 pre-agreed with my client signing the marketing agreement. During the process, if let's just say we had some home inspection repairs required, and my buyer is willing to pay for it out of the funds, and he's already spoken with the contractor, and it's $1,000. That invoice needs to be sent into escrow to hold out $1,000 for ABC window repair.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So what I would do in that kind of situation, any home inspection item, any wood storing insect inspection follow-ups or treatments, any lender required repairs, all of those things, if I don't schedule them, I'm going to track them. So if there are invoices involved and we receive them, I'm going to be forwarding them to the title company as well as the seller attorney if applicable. I'm also going to be keeping track of that because 3 days before closing, I do a review of everything, all of the documents for compliance, the settlement statement or the CD, if we've got it at that point, and I match up everything that I've got in my records and our records against what the title company is trying to charge. So that's definitely part of that process. That falls for both of those processes, but with the basic service, I'm just going to request it from you, the agent. I'm not, again, because it's that pared down service, I'm not going to communicate with the title company. I would come to you and say, Brian, it's about 4 days before closing. I've got all the documents here. Let me know when you get the prelim and I'll review it and make sure it looks good for you.
Speaking of that basic, let's get back to pricing.
Yeah, sure. So, the full service is $350 per transaction. The basic is $225. And that again is billed at settlement the same way. Now, the way that I do the billings is, again, when I send the contract into the settlement attorney or the title company, I include the invoice and the authorization form. With the basic document service, I'm still going to do that, but that's going to be the only communication I have with the closing folks. I'm just going to make sure they have my invoice and they know that it's supposed to be paid out at settlement. So that's, I guess, kind of a caveat to that no communication thing.
Well, you're definitely going to contact them when you want to get paid for sure, right?
Well, it's not even that. I wouldn't do it, but otherwise, how are they going to get my invoice?
Yeah.
I wouldn't want the agent to send it on my behalf. But honestly, what I run into for me personally, more than anything else, is the title companies not understanding how that works. So I try to explain to them, look, it's just like a contractor for a home repair. You know, it's an invoice, but instead of the buyer or the seller paying me direct, it's coming from the agent.
Mhm.
So all you have to do is just make sure that my check gets cut on the back end, display it however you want. There are some folks who have refused to add it as a descriptive element. They have to add a debit and credit, which if it's not done soon enough, can throw the CD out of whack. I have pulled my fee off of settlement statements to avoid delaying settlement because of that. If that kind of situation happens, I would just bill the agent directly after settlement. That happens maybe like 1 out of 10 times. Usually after the first or second time of working with a processor or a company, they kind of get the gist of it. But yeah.
Understood.
So 350 for the full, 225 for the basic. Both the offer composition and offer review services are 75 each, and that's a per use. So in other words, there's the terms I believe are something to the effect of, let's say I do an offer composition, there's counters back and forth. I can do up to 3 of those back and forth counters within that $75 charge, and that counts as one service use. I think my record is 16 counters back and forth for a single offer, and that's kind of where that came from. But if you have more than 3 counters back and forth, at that point, that's going to be an additional use of that service. I think it's within like a 15-day period. Offer review is the same thing. It's 75 per use, and that covers up to 3 offers reviewed for any given client on any given property. If if we rewind to a year ago when you're getting 6 and 7 offers for a property, the way that I do that is anything under 3, I do it via email. So I've got a template that I use. Anything above 3, I have a spreadsheet that I can format into a PDF to send to the clients. But as far as the charges, each offer after the first 3, I want to say it's like 25 per offer or something like that. So you could, the way I've got it set up is you could have me review up to 4 offers by a given deadline for a client for $100. And then the hourly rate is just that's time and materials. If I'm putting together a listing agreement or a listing amendment for you, it's just going to be however long it takes. And then those last 3, the offer composition, offer review, and any additional hourly work, I bill direct to agent on a monthly billing cycle, usually out by the 5th or the 7th of each month.
Yeah.
And with a 15-day turnaround. So how did I do, Brian? How did I answer all your questions?
No, yeah. So my next question is, a good clean transaction. I'm getting the $8.95, which more than covers my broker fee of 2 1/4, and there's some leftover to offset the commission that they're going to charge me my royalty fee. But my question to you is, if there's a cushion in there, and I'm not saying right out of the box, but if we work together well, and there's more than sufficient money in that sort of slush fund account that I don't need to have special permissions from the client, and if I use one of those other services, can you also get paid to escrow on that one?
I mean, I could if that was your preference. If you wanted me to loop that in.
No, I'm just asking. I'm not trying to be a devil's advocate. I'm just curious if I have a clean transaction and I'm getting $8.95 and your fee's $3.50, and I also
let's say you also did the offer composition service and you wanted to just go ahead and pay for that at settlement out of those funds that you have coming to you. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I can add that to my invoice when I submit it to the title company.
Okay.
So yeah, that's no problem at all. I mean, that helps me out because I don't have to wait, a period of time to get that.
I would prefer that.
Yeah.
You and me both. But yeah, that's the reason I do the monthly billing cycle is I understand the industry and how it works with checks coming in intermittently when things close. So I don't, I never want an agent to be in a position where I'm doing something to add to a workload, if that makes sense.
Is that a 30-day net?
For the monthly billing cycle?
Yeah, I'm just curious. If I use your services and I chose not to bill it through escrow or whatever, and I owe you $150, and at closing, we're all gonna get paid. You're gonna get your $350, and I'm gonna get my X thousands, hopefully. And at that point in time, when you're going to bill me at closing for the dollars owed to you for those other services, or how's that?
Well, that would be your preference. Right now, the way that I do it is, again, so it's monthly. So for instance, if I did 2 offer compositions for you in October and those
Okay.
things haven't closed yet and you haven't said anything specifically about billing changes, you would get an emailed invoice from me
Okay.
first-ish week of November
Okay.
for those services. And then, like,
Okay.
let's say that happened, and then you're like, hey, Greg, I just want to bundle these into my closings. I can do that and update the invoices that I have with your closings. Obviously, if they don't close, then the transaction coordination service, which brings me to my next item, would be handled differently. But those 2 offer composition, offer review, then I would have to rebill to you directly. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So on
So-
the off chance that I have a purchase contract and for some reason he breaches the contract, you've delivered your services just like the appraiser's delivered his and so forth. You're entitled to your fee. What happens in a case like that when we don't close?
So, yeah, so the way that I've got that set up is as follows. If there's a contract that releases for any reason at all between ratification and 7 days of settlement, and that's not the original settlement date, it's whatever the practical actual settlement date is. Anything that
Okay.
releases in that period of time, there's no charge.
Okay.
You the agent, get off kind of scot-free thing. If it's 7 days before settlement, anything within that period of time, and it releases then, there's a $125 fee, and that's again billed to you, the agent, directly.
Okay.
There's
Fair enough.
also, in conjunction with that, so and the reason I do that, Brian, is you, the agent, shouldn't have to suffer if your buyer, prime example, if the rates go up suddenly and the buyer no longer qualifies for the home that they put a contract in other words, the finance terms have changed and they can't buy the house at that point. You should, in my opinion, you shouldn't be penalized for that via paying for my services, because you're not going to get paid, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I disagree with that, because I think everyone who puts their effort toward the file, just like the appraiser, he's entitled to his fee, and I don't like the idea of you working just as diligent. When I was in California and I did super jumbos, I did a $4 million deal, and at the end of the day, my check was huge compared to everybody else's. So I don't sleep well at night knowing that you've put in hard work and effort and get nothing for it. So I just want to get clear on that.
No, I appreciate that. And, I'm happy to talk to you about if that case ever happens, about working something out, but it's not something that I'm going to require as a contingent part of the agreement that I have in place, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yep.
The other thing that with the agreement, kind of in line with that, I don't have a use clause. There are some transaction coordinators, the 1099ers or, otherwise, will often put into their agreements use clauses. In other words, once you sign an agreement with them, you have to use them for your transactions. I don't have that in place. I literally have agents that I've done I have one agent that I've done no deals for, and she's been under the agreement since last July. She literally just has me there as peace of mind for her. If she ever gets into a situation where she feels like she's overwhelmed, she knows she can reach out to me and I can help out. But generally speaking, she prefers to go her route. That's totally kosher with the way that I have set up the agreement, because there's no requirement and no fee once you sign to use the services. They're just optional and there for you. Which is kind of in line with the, if there's a release, what happens there.
Okay.
And that is my list. So did you have any other questions?
No,
I do not.
Okay. What I'm going to do,
So-
and
I had heard, might have been just a rumor, that when we sign up for you, as crazy as it might sound, that you send gift cards to my favorite restaurant as like a welcoming package. Is there any truth to that?
I send gift cards to you for your favorite restaurant as a welcome package?
Yeah, I heard that. I'm thinking, dear Lord, why would someone send me a $200 Ruth's Chris gift card just on
I tell you what, I have not heard that rumor, but if you're
I'll squash it. It's on Facebook, my friend. It's on Facebook. I'll squash it.
You know, that's, yeah, you'll have to show me that. I don't, I'm not
Like,
big on the
I'm just,
social
I'm
media
just
thing.
checking with you. I'm just checking with
But
you.
if you were up this way, I mean, because I do everything virtual, and that's something I should mention, I'm 100% virtual. So I'm based outside
Okay.
of Winchester. I have agents and actually brokers with different brokerages that I work with that I've never met in over 2 years. But if you ever find yourself up this way towards Winchester for any reason, and you're looking for a good burger, I can absolutely recommend and maybe even join you for a place that's not too far. Maybe we go Dutch on the check. Maybe, I cover that.
And
That's something
I
to
don't like
discuss
the
at a
Dutch
later
idea.
date.
That Dutch idea, that's old fashioned. I like the fact that you buy something for me. I get
Gotcha.
committed to you. I'm just kidding with you. You
So
know
what
that.
I'm doing now is I'm putting my email address and my cell phone number in the chat.
Perfect.
For those who are listening to the recording and not really looking at it, a phone number is going to be 540-327-6369. And my email is
Okay.
really simple. It's Greg, Greg, at conradservices.net. And that's CONRAD, services is plural.net. I would highly encourage anyone who has additional questions or even just wants to test the waters out to reach out to me. Usually I set aside roughly about a half an hour for an initial call, and then I can kind of get a grasp of how you work as an agent. Go ahead and set up your Google site, go ahead and get all the documents set up. Have to get you to something I should mention. The agent has to have in place a signed agreement prior to me completing any work. So if you're in a situation where you're kind of on the edge with toying about using this service for transaction coordination, and suddenly you get hit with 3 ratified contracts tomorrow, before I can help you, we have to get that agreement signed and in place. After that, we're off the races.
That was another thing. While we are all Maytag repairmen, this is anything I can do up front to give you my setup, sort of my pets company, my attorney, my lender, and all this stuff. So my file has got some groundwork, and then on that first transaction, I'm not scrambling saying, "Oh my God, I forgot to get signed up with Greg. Can we pre-sign up?"
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not even a pre-sign up. Once it's signed, you've got access to all the services. It's just on you when you want to enact them.
Okay, so
I can tell you
how would I initiate signing an agreement?
So what I'll do is once we finish up here, I'll hit the end record button, and then you can just give me your email address, and I'll send you a copy of the agreement so that way you can take a look at it. And if it looks good to you, I can send it to you as a DocuSign, basically.
Okay, perfect. Yep, I'm all in. I'm excited.
All right. Well, that concludes the recorded portion of this. Again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. That cell again is 540-327-6369. And my name is Greg with Conrad Services.
Thanks,
Perfect.
Greg.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you for setting this up, Charity. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
See you tomorrow, Charity.
All right. Bye.
Bye.